Now, aside from doing just music concerts and stuff like that, you do other things. You don't just take pictures of great band members and stuff. You take other pictures. You do other stuff.
Yeah,
too.
about 5 or so years into it, I started getting asked to do portrait stuff, like high school graduation photos and weddings and stuff. And I started doing those because they pay well, especially weddings. But a wedding is like a 40-hour work week. A wedding is a huge undertaking.
Just one wedding.
Yeah, I mean, you're there for 10 hours during the day, and then, processing all those photos. There's thousands of photos.
Yeah.
So that's a big job. And I really don't do a lot of weddings anymore because it's just
a big undertaking.
Well, and then you're just dealing with a lot of unsavory people and drunks by the end of the night and bridezillas and momzillas and
we talked about this with another episode. I was like, isn't it tough with this? Oh, it was Tricky Dick, I think it was. Yeah, and I was like, is it tough when you're dealing with some of these soon-to-be brides and all that stuff? I want my wedding perfect and da-da-da-da.
I got thrown out of a wedding once because right after the reception started, everybody was already drunk, and the groom and his brand-new father-in-law, the wife's father, got into a fist fight on the dance floor. And this was like right after dinner.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Level Up Cleveland. And this week we have Mr. Joe Kleon with us.
Hello.
What's up, Joe? Thanks for coming down.
Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Joe's a photographer that you have absolutely seen his pictures before. He's been a radio personality on several different channel stations, cities. You may be familiar with him. He's done some work on NCX here locally. And where I'm most familiar with you is back when you were doing the Metamorphosis show on college radio on JCU now.
WJCU.
Yeah, we're also used to the UJC moniker. It's hard for me. But you were that's where I remember you mostly from. Actually, was from that.
That was fun. That was the funnest time of 20 years in radio. That was the funnest time was when I started off on college radio.
Yeah, and that was Bill Peters and you basically and a few others, but that was the time when all that was starting to the 80s.
Yeah, Saturday night was the metal night. Bill was on Friday, and then me and E-Rock did shows on Saturday.
It was cool.
And then somebody named Micho was also on Saturday, if you remember him.
Well,
Mario Becerra, he was on Saturday too.
And that was when, and wasn't Kapka in the morning? Wasn't
yeah.
Mitch Kapka? Yeah. Wasn't he in the morning?
Yeah.
He did like Spooky Tooth and them guys, that bands and stuff like that.
He was really mean to me.
Was he? Mitch was?
Oh, yeah. He was really mean to me. Like when I first started there, I was just out of high school and I was kind of afraid of everybody, and he was really mean to me, and I really got in his face and like.
Did you?
Oh yeah, and cursed at him, and he never talked to me again after that.
No kidding. He had a good show though. I like Mitch's show.
I listened to him even after that.
And
everyone's gonna love we started off talking about Mitch.
Well, I just wanted because what's funny because I was riding in on the way here and I was like, who was that dude? It came to me. I was like, Mitch Kapka. I remember, so I had to bring it up. It just took a lot of energy to bring that.
Kick out the jams, man.
Yeah, kick out the jams. So what you were doing back then was like a progressive metal kind of thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I played a lot of stuff. It was mostly progressive metal, hard rock. I had some punk. I played a lot of weird. The great thing about those days was you could play anything.
Yeah, especially at college.
I played everything from Fate's Warning to Rush to the Crumbsuckers and kind of everything in between. So it was cool to be able to just do anything I wanted.
So how did that? That's where it all started, correct? Would you say? Mm-hmm. So you started in the whole broadcasting. Did you go to school and all that to do all this? How did you get involved in the beginning?
I went to school there for a couple years, got my radio show, and then after 2 years, I was also working with Bill Peters at Warner Electro Atlantic in Independence when they had their their local office. And one of the guys from Atco Records got me a gig at WONE, my first real radio gig.
In Akron?
Yeah, and once I started, because I'm from Cuyahoga Falls, so once I started doing WONE, that was kind of the reason I was going to school, and it didn't really seem wise to do 2 more years of student loans when I was already working full-time in the business I was going to school for, so I dropped out of school and started working at ONE, and I stayed at UJC, at John Carroll, for probably another 7 or 8 years after that. So I was doing both, and then I kind of just did commercial radio for 20 years.
That was it.
Until the industry went down the toilet, yeah.
And you always did broadcasting in the radio business? Did you ever do any other of the jobs, radio jobs?
Yeah, my last gig was down in Canton. I was promotion director for a top 40 station. But other than that, I was always a full-time air personality. That was 99% of what I did, yeah.
Now, I was reading some stuff on you. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there about you and some of the things. And you've done some, there's some interesting things that have happened to you during your broadcasting thing that no one would ever even imagine. For instance, if I'm not mistaken, you were broadcasting radio during Hurricane Fran.
Yes, in Savannah, Georgia.
Literally while the hurricane is happening.
Yeah.
The Eye is not far from you whatsoever, and you're on the radio broadcasting a show.
The Eye was predicted to come ashore between Savannah and Hilton Head, and I was on a barrier island called Wilmington Island, which was right by Savannah. And the radio station was a rickety old piece of shit kind of place. And they told me I could leave anytime I wanted, and I was doing the overnight shift, midnight to 6. Well, by the time it got really bad, about 2 or 3 in the morning, it was so bad that I couldn't leave. And I had a bottle of Jack Daniels there, a bowl full of weed, and I was scared shitless. And I sat there and did my show. And we went off, the electric went out, but we had a generator. So I fired up the generator, and I was one of the only media outlets in the whole city that was live during that hurricane.
Now, what were you doing? Were you broadcasting music?
Oh, yeah. People were doing hurricane parties. I was playing Rock You Like a Hurricane, and I was all fucked up, and it was just, it was wild. And there was big pieces of debris crashing into the station and stuff. And it was.
You could hear all that stuff happening the whole time.
Oh yeah, I was waiting for the windows to break out and stuff. It was scary. I wanted to leave about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and I opened the door, and it was so bad that there was no way. If I would have walked out the door, I would have just been blown away.
No shit.
And when I left, it was weird because by the time I left, I had probably drank half the bottle of Jack Daniels, and I was all fucked up. And I opened the door to walk out, and I looked to where my car was, and my car was gone. And I thought, oh, my God, somebody stole my car during a hurricane. What the hell? And it took me a minute to realize that there was this big gravel parking lot where the station was. My car had blown about 200 feet from the hurricane, from the wind. It had blown about 200 feet way over to this field on the other side of the building. And my car was completely battered, with rocks hitting it and stuff. And then I went to go back to Tybee Island where I lived, and the island was closed, so I couldn't go home. And so I went to this strip mall parking lot. I was exhausted. The hurricane, when it hit the jet stream, it kind of went north and landed in southern North Carolina. So it was kind of far away. But I went to the strip mall parking lot and just fell asleep in my car. And some redneck cop came over and almost arrested me for vagrancy because I was sleeping in my car. It was a
pretty wild experience.
It was an interesting. I have a tape of that somewhere, and I've always been wanting to dig that up because
a tape of the show that you actually brought. Oh yeah, that would be really good.
You can hear bangs into the building, and you can hear the wind roaring outside and stuff.
And are you talking about all this as this is happening?
Oh yeah, I put people on the air. Anybody that still had a working phone, I was talking to. I was talking to some people.
No kidding! You were doing all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, it was a
hurricane right now.
Yeah. Is that what they're playing?
I don't know what they're playing, but it sounds like bashing rocks up against the wall from a hurricane.
It's like Charlie Brown's parents. That's what it sounds like.
So, what got you interested in doing that to begin with? At what point did you want
radio?
to? Yeah.
When I was about 12 in Cuyahoga Falls, when they started the Rocket on the River down there in downtown Cuyahoga Falls, it was called the TGIF parties, and they had bands that would play down there. And my mom would drop me off on Friday after school down there, and I would watch the bands, and she'd pick me up at 8 or 9 o'clock. And I got to know there was a radio station in Cuyahoga Falls called WCUE. It was a AM station, but they played top 40 and rock, and they played the Zeppelin song that was the radio song of the day, like Heartbreaker and stuff like that. And they sponsored this TGIF party. So I started going down there and started watching the bands, and I became friends with some of the guys from the radio station. And so after the bands were done, I would help them pick up trash and help them clean up and stuff. And so the one guys asked my mom when she was picking me up if the next week they could take me to the radio station and give me some albums because I always helped them out. And my mom said yes. So they took me to the station and took me in this record room that probably now in my memory is 1,000 times bigger than it actually was.
It's probably as big as
but
this.
they're like, take whatever you want. And I'm like 12. And I took like 2 albums because I didn't want to. And I came walking out and they're like, no, you go in there and you come out with at least like 20. And so I got like, Thin Lizzy, Black Rose, like bands I didn't even really know at the time. Some Rush promos. I was already a Rush fan. I got some Rush radio promos I'd never seen before and just walked out with this really cool stack of albums. And I don't know if you remember a DJ named Matt Patrick. He was on WKDD. He was a Northeastern Ohio DJ for probably 30 years or longer. He was just starting out there, and he let me sit in on the air with him for like an hour and showed me how to queue up the records and how to talk up to the post and do all that kind of stuff. And so I started doing that at home, just playing radio, and that's kind of how I got interested.
It got the fever, man.
And then when I was at John Carroll and saw E-Rock at the radio station, and he said he would give me my own radio show, I'm like, oh, hell yeah. This is, I've always thought about this, and that was my opportunity, and somehow I fell into it that way and ended up doing it for 20 years.
So, and you went to school for broadcasting there also while you did the radio station.
My degree was in communications, but the first 2 years I really didn't take any communications classes because it was a Jesuit university, so they were all kind of religion classes, theology classes. There might have been a history of broadcasting class, and that's one of the reasons I dropped out because I was paying all this money for classes that I didn't care about.
They weren't going to help you in what you were trying to pursue.
I mean, I wasn't going to talk about earth science when I'm doing a rock show or anything.
Right.
So it just seemed kind of a waste. I was really just there. I would skip classes to go do radio shows, just fill in for people. If somebody needed a sub for their show and I had a class, I would just not go to the class and go to the radio station.
So you're just learning on the fly then?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So and are you basically like so you have other DJs and stuff at this point that you're looking up to and trying to like copy some things off of these guys so you can figure yourself out eventually? I mean, like who are you influenced by as far as DJs and stuff go at that? Because that's what, at that time there was really DJs. And
yeah,
really
a lot of the ones that were influential back then were DJs that were on WUJC. I mean, Bill Peters, he had been there years, however many years when I started there, and I ended up becoming really good friends with him and working with them at Warner and stuff. And he was great. Sue Sendas was on the air there. She was on the End for a long time, and she's now does shows on NCX.
Oh.
And I've become really good friends with her over the years. And she was doing a modern rock show, playing stuff that I hated, like REM and The Cure, and stuff that as a 20-year-old metalhead I couldn't stand.
Yeah.
But I always listened to her because she was so good on the air. So there was people like that. I listened to Mitch because he was good on the air, And there was a guy that did a interview show on MMS, a syndicated show, a California DJ named Jim Ladd, if you ever heard of Jim Ladd. If you listen to the Roger Waters Radio Chaos album, he's the DJ on the album.
Oh.
The album is like a radio show, and there's a DJ in between songs.
So he plays that
he's
part.
that guy. He's a legendary, like at the beginning of rock radio, he was like a legendary California DJ.
I see.
And he did these just legendary interviews with Neil Peart and stuff. He had I think it was a Sunday night interview show. And I loved him. He actually came out with his memoirs about 10 years ago, and it's a great, great book.
Now, when you were doing all this stuff, now you were basically a disc jockey, though. Did you do interview type things also, or is that something you also would do? Or?
Yeah, it was after about a year being on at WUJC. I was getting calls from like people from Metal Blade and stuff, and I realized that some of these bands that I loved, like Armored Saint and Lizzie Borden, and bands like that I could get phone interviews with them. Overkill and Candlemass and King Diamond and all these bands, and so I started doing a ton of those interviews, and then maybe a year or so after that, I met some people from Scene Magazine, and they were like, hey, you're doing all these interviews. Why don't you write an article? I was a decent writer. My one class at John Carroll that I liked was creative writing that I got good grades in. So I started taking some of my interviews and turning them into articles for Scene. That was like 1989.
Wow.
And I'm still working for Scene now, how many,
Wow.
35 or whatever years later, except for the time I was in Savannah for 5 years. I've been at Scene from 89 till now, either as a writer or now for the last, 18 years as a photographer.
Wow. And that just tells me that you don't burn many bridges. You
I do burn some, but I be careful not to burn ones that,
important bridges.
Yeah. No, but the scene people have always been great. I've had great relationships with them through the years, and they're really great people. Even the changes in people over the years have been great. So I've always been really happy there.
Hell yeah. So when you get into broadcasting and then you find yourself going to other places, broadcasting took you on your journey as far as moving geographically. Is that how that works?
Yeah, my daughter moved down to South Carolina, and I wanted to be close to her. And I've been on the air on O&E for about a year. And so I took a vacation with the girl I was dating at the time. And I actually interviewed for a job at Atlantic Records in Atlanta, which was only a couple hours away from my daughter. And I went to Atlanta, and I hated it. Right when I got off the highway and got into downtown, some homeless guy came up to my car and was squeegeeing my window. And I'm telling the guy to, get the fuck away from me. And he took his bucket of dirty squeegee water and just threw it in the window and covered me in dirty water. So I go into this interview at Atlantic Records covered in shit water, basically. And I got the job. I think they felt sorry for me.
You're like, this guy will come in here like this, and he won't do anything.
I got the job, but I'm driving out of the city going, God, I hate this city. It wasn't just the squeegee guy. I just, for some reason, just had a really bad vibe. And I'm thinking, God, I'm going to take this job and move here, and I'm going to hate it. What am I going to do? And I had 2 weeks of vacation, and we were planning on going to Hilton Head. So on the way to Hilton Head, I'm all disheveled and pissed off and not knowing what I'm going to do. And we'd driven for like 3 hours or whatever after we had already driven to Atlanta, and I just wanted to get out of the car and chill. And I see this sign that says Tybee Island Beach. What the hell is that? But let's go to the beach. And we got off, took the exit, ended up on the beach of this really nice little barrier island, which I ended up living on for 5 years.
No shit.
And it's like 30 minutes from Savannah. And so I'm sitting on the beach with a boombox, listening to, finding a radio station. And I found this rock station that was like one of the best rock stations I ever heard. We sat there for like 4 hours, and I'm listening to the station. It was freaking great. And I went to my car, of course, this is before cell phones, and dug out some quarters and went to a payphone and called the radio station and somehow got the program director on the phone. And, hey, I'm this douche from Cleveland. I'm looking for a job. You need anybody? And he's like, well, yeah, we need somebody on our morning show. And I went in the next morning and got the job.
Get the hell out of here.
I called Atlantic and told them I wasn't going to take the job, and I moved to Savannah instead. And I was there for about 5 years till I got the job at NCX, and I moved back to Cleveland because I always wanted to work in Cleveland, and I moved back to take the job at NCX.
Wow. That's a great story.
My Savannah time was fun. It was fun. And I also worked for another station in Savannah, another rock station. And then during that time, I took a year away and went up to Vermont and did some network broadcasting in Vermont for this network. And I was up there for about 8 or 9 months doing winter sports network stuff.
No shit.
And I spent 3 or 4 months skiing all through New England and doing broadcasts from the ski resorts and stuff. And had a company credit card and a brand new Jeep. And it was just 3 months of party. It was a 3-month party.
So you're just going up there at that point, and you're just like talking to these athletes and stuff like that, these skiers?
No, I'm doing ski reports basically around New England, given the conditions on the mountains, and
I see.
Everywhere. I was doing even West Coast places and talking about Vail and places like that, and then also all throughout New England. I did about 40 stations. I did 2 broadcasts every day, one right after the other because I'm on, I didn't call the places back later. But I would do 2 in a row on 40 stations, a couple TV stations. It was 80 to 100 broadcasts every day. It took about 4 or 5 hours. And that really honed my skills as a broadcaster because some of those stations and those TV stations, if you were not 59.5 to 60.5, if you were anywhere outside of those parameters, you had to cut your report over. Oh. And so I got to the point where I could do that really easily, and that really, really helped my broadcasting skills being able to do that. So that was I didn't know it at the time. I just took it because it paid well and it seemed like something cool to do. And I had just left my job at the one radio station because the program director was the owner's son, which, how often is that a good thing? And the dude was a big coke addict, and it was just
that's usually the other part of that equation. Somehow, when it's the owner's son, the son's a coke addict.
He sorted himself to death a few years after I left.
Really?
But I got out of there and went up to Vermont, and I didn't realize that it was a really great job for my broadcasting, because it just really honed. Instead of just going on the air talking about whatever the hell I wanted, I was really,
You had parameters
I was
that
really
tight.
regimented, and it was disciplined, and it was great. I'm really fortunate that I had that period of time.
Now, as far as the way that your whole broadcasting career went, do you have any regrets? Is there anything? I mean, it sounds like you're pretty, like, as you talk, it sounds like, yeah, and then I did this, I did, and it sounds like you did.
I regret I didn't go into a profession that paid better.
I was going to get into that a little bit, but I mean, like, all the broadcasters do complain and say this profession does not pay shit.
I really don't have any regrets. I had a ton of fun. I'm a huge music head, and being able to do that. And commercial radio jobs are not easy to get. I mean, if you look in Cleveland back, I mean, it's a lot different now. There's even less jobs, but in the 90s, there's maybe a dozen rock radio DJs.
Yeah.
How many other, how many car mechanics are there, or other professions? So those jobs were hard to get.
Yeah.
And when I could score those jobs, I always felt like it was an accomplishment, just because they're so few and far between.
Yeah.
And I think you had to be good to get those jobs.
Well, yeah, right.
And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I remember at NCX, that's where I met Michael Stanley, and I ended up working with him as his photographer for 20 years. But I would fill in for the production guy who did their commercials, because I knew how to work Pro Tools, and they had an early version of Pro Tools that they did all their commercials on. And so when the production guy was on vacation, they would take me off overnights, and I would go sit in during the day and do production. And so one day I'm sitting in there, and Bill Lewis, the program director, walks in. He's like, "Hey, Michael had a flat tire. He can't do his show. It's like 20 minutes until his show." He's like, "You're doing his show. We can't get anybody, in that 20 minutes." I'm thinking, holy shit, I got to do Michael Stanley's show. And I was terrified, but I went in and did it, and had a great time. And the next, I'd only met Michael a couple times. I kind of tried to stay away from him, because I didn't want to bother him when he was working and whatnot. And he came in and said, "Dude, you sounded great." And every time he was off after that, he had me do his show. So I was like his fill-in guy.
His personal fill-in guy.
And then I started doing photography, and he saw some of my photos of Wish You Were Here, because I already worked with the band, so they were one of the first bands I started shooting. And he had me come out and start to do some shows, and I ended up working with him for 20 years. And almost 20 years as his photographer.
So wow, so that's a good way to start your photography career.
Yeah.
Because that could quickly catapult you.
Oh, yeah.
Legitimacy. I mean, like, well, this is Michael Stanley's photographer. It's like, oh, yeah, well.
And there was a photo I took at Tower City of the band, and I had only done a handful of gigs, and I was there, and he's like, "Hey, in 5 minutes, we're going to do a band photo." And I'm like, shit, I've never done a band photo with anybody before.
Yeah.
And I took this photo at the back of the stage, like facing out over the crowd, and they used that photo for almost every gig from 2006 until he stopped playing before the pandemic.
So what exactly got you into the photography? Was it a money-based decision? Like, I'm not making enough money.
It was a total accident. I bought a $1,000 camera that I couldn't afford for a trip to Mexico. I was going to visit the Mayan ruins, and I wanted a decent camera to take pictures of, like, Chichen Itza and Tulum and the Mayan places that I was planning on visiting. And so I bought this $1,000 camera. I'd probably taken 200 pictures with disposable cameras in my life. I didn't know a thing about photography. But I saw this advertisement for this Sony camera. It took those 3-inch CDs instead of memory cards, and the advertising was all, wowed me. And I put this thing on a credit card, and I couldn't afford it. And I was thinking it was the dumbest thing I ever did. And I went out to Mexico and just had the camera on auto, just point and shoot. And I got great pictures of the pyramids and the Mayan ruins. And so I come back, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with this thing? I haven't even made a payment on it yet. And I was a big fan of Art Bell, the Coast to Coast AM radio show. And so I was
Coast to Coast. I remember Coast to Coast.
It's still on now.
Is it?
Nora, yeah. But the Art Bell days were fantastic. Yeah. And I would stay up because I was an overnight guy anyway.
Yeah,
so
late.
I was used to being up overnight. So I listened to that show all the time. And I'm listening to the show a few days after I got back, and they said, like, on Friday they were doing a show on the Mayans. So this is 2002, and I emailed them and said I just got back from there. I got these great photos, and I sent them a couple, and they wanted to use it on the front page of their website. And that was the most syndicated radio show on the planet at the time. I mean, it was all over the earth, in all kinds of countries. It was everywhere, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stations. So they put my photo on the front page of the website, and they linked to my page of photos from Mexico. And I sold about $400 or $500 of photos that night.
Almost paid for half the
And
camera.
I thought, holy shit, I can make money with this goddamn thing. And so I was working on the crew with Wish You Were Here, E-Rock's band, because we were friends since John Carroll. I started taking pictures at those shows, and then Michael saw that I was starting to take photos. I started taking pictures of Michael. And I had lots of connections from my commercial radio experience and from working at Warner Electro Atlantic from the record labels. So when second B-class bands like Collective Soul or people like that would come to town, if I knew a record guy or knew somebody at the label, I would get a photo pass. Excuse me. And every one I got, it was easier to get the next one.
Yeah, right. So
And I would have never imagined that 20 years later I had shot 1,500 bands and, bands like Paul McCartney. And I look back on it and it just blows my mind because it was a freaking accident. I just stumbled into it. Once the ball started rolling, I just ran with it,
Which is how a lot of things start for people all the time. So,
and I never took a class or read a book or anything. And after I really got going, I never wanted to do that because I didn't want to be clouded by rules.
Yeah.
And so I'm just completely
doing your own
self-taught.
thing, doing your own thing. I mean, we touched on the broadcasting career, but the photography career has got to be really cool because you're taking photographs of some of the most unbelievably profound bands that ever played rock and roll.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking the Stones, we're talking Aerosmith, and we're talking everybody pretty much from on down too. I mean,
Paul McCartney, Taylor Swift, Bieber, Miley Cyrus, and Barry Manilow, and everybody in between.
And when you're taking these photos, this isn't just like a freelancing thing where you're just like having fun and you just show up and take pictures. You get hired either by local magazines or the bands themselves.
Yeah, I could never get that kind of access if I was just shooting just for fun.
Yeah, because you're like right in the pit. You're like you get a
lot of shows. Yeah,
you're
a
like
lot of shows. I'm in the pit. Some are more and more these days are getting to be from the soundboard, but a lot's from the pit. Yeah,
really. Now. Being right by the soundboard, are you like right by the soundboard when you're taking these pictures?
A lot of times, yeah.
Do you ever get to interact with that whole process that's going on over there? I mean, that's
not really. I try and stay out of their way.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
The front of house guys got to see the stage to see what's going on, so I
yeah.
try and stay out of their way and stuff. But like for Springsteen recently, they put us behind the soundboard, and the soundboard is bad enough because you've got to really zoom.
Yeah, you're back there.
I'm standing on a stool sometimes with a tripod if it's allowed, and it's difficult from that far away.
Yeah.
And when they move you back even farther, it gets even more difficult.
So what's the purpose of that? They're just trying to sell more tickets up front or something?
No, just because they don't care. I think, and they just just like why they have the rule of the first 3 songs. Most of the time I'm just allowed to shoot the first 3 songs. Sometimes it's the first 2 songs.
Really?
And that's just the way it's been for a long time.
Is that because they're afraid the bands will look like torn, they
they'll
start
actually
falling
look,
apart?
Yeah, they'll look more like a rock and roll band when they get some sweat on them.
Yeah,
and stuff.
I'm thinking they would look better after the 10th or 11th.
I mean, there's some bands I'm allowed to shoot more, or shoot the whole show, or some band like Britney Spears actually is smart. Like I got to shoot like songs 4, 5, 6, and 7, and the reason was because that would have the most outfit and set changes, so it had the most diverse amount of photos. But I think a lot of bands don't even know what the restrictions are on the photographers. They don't even pay attention, and the publicists and stuff don't even tell them.
Has that changed over the years as far as your restrictions go?
It's gotten a bit worse. I didn't start till 2002, and I know a lot of photographers, like Anastasia Pantios and Janet McCoska, who are friends of mine, that, back then, you shot Zeppelin at the Coliseum, you shot the whole 3-hour show.
Yeah.
But that's definitely not the way now. It's a lot more regimented. We get escorted to the stage. They tell us exactly where to stand, exactly what we can do. And when the 3rd song's over, they escort you out. You're never left alone at all, ever.
And there's no, do you know the reason? Is there, can you, why? Why?
Probably because some assholes have screwed shit up and, done things they shouldn't have done and stuff. And it's just very tightly controlled. And a lot of bands don't want, they don't want you to catch photos of them, doing something, going behind an amp or doing something or picking their ass or whatever, so they make sure that everything is really regimented.
I got it. Now, any most amazing, I mean, come on, you're the idea of doing this puts you in how many shows? Just that alone
I've done
opens
about
your eyes to
1,500. I think I've done, give or take, about 100.
And that's concert shoots?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
For a while before COVID, for about 6 years or maybe 7, I was doing 100 to 150 a year.
Wow.
And I also have a day job working at home for an indie music distributor. So it was a grind. I loved it, but I was just in this grind where I'd work, do a show, and sometimes in the summer I'd do 10 shows in a row. And I just kind of got used to it, and I had access that I could shoot almost any show that I wanted. And so I took advantage of that. I wanted to build a huge portfolio, and I had access to all these big artists, so I did as many shows as I could. And in the beginning, I didn't do stuff like Bieber or Taylor Swift because I don't like that music. I was more doing hard rock and metal stuff. But I realized that I can sell a lot more pop and country stuff. Bruce Springsteen fan that's our age doesn't really care about buying a photo, but a mom that took her kid to her first show at Taylor Swift or Bieber always wants to buy that photo.
Yes.
And visually, those shows are a lot better. Springsteen's got kind of a minimalistic light show. Well, the pop bands, a lot of times, they're not even really singing half the time. And so it's all about the visuals and the LEDs, and the shows are brilliantly lit, and there's all, so visually...
From a photographer's perspective, that's perfect. Yeah.
They're a lot better. So I started shooting those pop shows and stuff, and I really like doing that because visually they're a lot better. But to shoot bands that I've loved since I was 5 years old or 6 years old, like Aerosmith, or my favorite band Rush, or even just iconic bands like the Stones or Elton John or those bands, it's just such a rush, to borrow a phrase, when to have access to those people that I idolized when I was a little kid. And even shows like Bieber that I would never listen to for pleasure. When the lights go down in an arena and there's 20,000 people there and the place erupts, that it's just such an electric feeling.
Yeah, right. The energy's still there no matter what.
I just feed off that energy no matter what. And I don't even really pay attention to the music. The first time I shot Rush, I was so freaked out because I've seen them over 50 times, and they're my all-time favorite band of all time. I remember riding home from that show thinking, what songs did they play? What were the first? And I didn't know what the first three songs were because I was so in the zone, just trying to compose my pictures, that I wasn't even really paying attention to what they were playing.
Now when you're like, you find out you have this shoot, you get booked for it, you get hired, and then you're on your way to the shoot. Are you going over in your mind, like, for instance, I just talked to you about this on the break. I said I saw the one picture of the Who, and you got Daltrey spinning, he's famously spun his microphone around, and you got one picture where you caught that microphone in midair. It almost looks like it's erect, and it's right by Pete Townsend. He'll say it's pointing at Pete Townsend. It's a super cool picture, especially if you know the Who and the whole Daltrey thing, and you're seeing that. It's beautiful. So you're on the way there. Do you stop and think to yourself, I want to get a picture of him twirling that microphone and catch it right there? Or is this something, did these things just come into you kind of as you're clicking?
A little bit of both, but I don't really think about much on the way to the show, but I do homework before the show.
Okay.
And I don't know if a lot of other photographers do this, because I've seen me get shots that other photographers that are there don't get because they don't know that it's going to happen. But what I'll do for most shows, especially arena shows, is I'll go to a website called setlist.fm. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not.
I'm not.
It has millions of set lists from every band and every tour going back to the 70s. And so let's say Rush is playing. I'll go to setlist.fm and I'll look at shows from the last couple of weeks. And the majority of the time, they play the same songs in the same order. 95% of bands play the same. It's all rehearsed and regimented. A lot of times they have, MIDI stuff programmed. They can't really vary from the songs. So it's usually always, the first three songs are always the same. So I find out what those three songs are, and then I'll go to YouTube and I'll search for those songs, but I'll search the parameters where it only shows videos from the last month. And it's usually cell phone videos, but I'll get shots from a week before on the tour. And I'll watch those three songs, and a lot of times, the beginning of the second song, the singer will jump off the drum riser, or there's something that happens every time.
Consistently, yeah.
And so I realize what those are, and then I can be ready for them when the show happens. And, the singer will grab something, or there'll be a special lighting thing on the guitarist or something, and I'll be ready for that shot, and I'll see the other photographers are pointing the other way because they don't know that that's happening. So that's kind of the homework that I've done, and I've been able to get a lot of good shots I would have otherwise missed because I take 20 minutes and just watch some videos, from fan videos, cell phone videos.
Yeah. Now, during this time, you're kind of like, there's the average fan at the show, and then there's you, the photographer, where you're kind of like more intimate with what's going on with the band. The band knows they're being photographed. Obviously, every show they're being photographed. So Do you ever have interactions with these bands or anything crazy happen where you actually are, aside from the ones that hire you directly, I'm talking about more so like some of the bigger bands and stuff like that. You ever have
Not
any?
very often, but sometimes. I've partied with a few of them, done some, hung out with some backstage. I got thrown out of the pit by Joe Jonas one time.
Oh, the Jonas Brothers.
That's kind of street cred, being thrown out of a show by Joe Jonas,
That definitely helps you.
He was lip syncing, and during songs he would move the mic away from his mouth, and the vocals would still be unaffected. And so this song ended on a note where he was holding out a note, and he moved the mic away, and the was still going on, and I just inadvertently started laughing. And I was the only photographer there for some reason. Nobody else was shooting the show at House of Blues. And he just pointed at me and went like that. And it was like after 2 songs. And I had, got my 2 songs. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I guess that's
and I left. And
wow. How many times do you think you've seen lip syncing at a concert? I mean, do you think,
well, it's pretty easy to tell.
I know,
if
but
I'm
do you
that
see
close.
it a lot?
More and more. And sometimes they're not 100% lip syncing, but they'll have a vocal track and they'll sing along to the vocal track. And the vocal track is maybe 30% of what you're hearing.
Wow.
And, there's some pop artists, I won't name any, but there's some pop artists that they'll be running all around the stage and doing these choreographed dance routines and up and down stairs and stuff. And the vocals are unaffected. They're pristine.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
But then in between songs, they'll turn on their head mic so they can talk to the crowd, and they're out of breath.
Yeah.
And, hey, they're talking to the crowd. And then the next song starts, and boom, it's back to back to pristine land. And, it's pretty easy to tell what's going on there if if you're paying attention.
Yeah,
but,
well, you got to.
The 12-year-olds in the audience don't care, but it's easy to tell.
Any shoots stand out? Like, is there one, or is there one that you just, for whatever reason, you don't forget that one? Or
Rush, the 2 times I've shot them, just because they're my favorite band. The Stones, because they're just such an iconic band. To be able to shoot them was, I'm not really a big Stones fan, but it was amazing to shoot them. Anybody that's of that caliber, like Elton John or Paul McCartney or the Stones, even if I don't like them personally, just to shoot somebody who is so iconic and is known worldwide. My Kiss shoots were always fun, because the one thing that's great about Kiss is the first 3 songs, they really don't even pay much attention to the audience. They're just mugging for the photographers. They will come up and point and get right up in your face. And that's why ever since you were 12, every picture of Kiss you've seen is freaking great, because that's what they do. And that's why their image from the 70s is so amazing, is because they've always taken that into consideration.
Smart, played to the cameras,
Very
always
smart,
knew
yeah.
how to manage themselves. Always.
And I've been a big Kiss fan since I was a little kid, so that's a fun band for me to shoot.
Hell yeah. Well, and just the fact that they're Kiss.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if you're going to shoot something, like, how much more colorful and how much more fire can you get, in
that's
a
the
show?
one. That's the one rock band that the stage show is just so incredible.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And other bands like Rush always have had really, really good stage shows too. But then there's like Springsteen and people like that, where they're just minimalistic, but the focus is on the performers. So I still get good shots. It just doesn't have anything to do with the lighting. It's just the performer and catching the performer in the zone.
Yeah, and you tend to, like, a lot of your photos that I'm looking at, you tend to capture these people like when you're looking at the Steven Tyler photos and stuff. It's like you capture those things that make Steven Tyler, like the little things that he does, and you're like, that's that. In that one moment, you got it. It's like, oh yeah, that's what he does. That's how he looks. That's his thing that he does, and you get it every time, it seems like.
I had a couple people when I first started tell me that a couple different things. One was that my photos made them feel like they were there, like they didn't go to the show, but your photos made me feel like I was at the show. And then other people who were there would tell me sometimes that my photos took them back and, from when they were there at the show. And that's kind of what I try and capture, is just, the emotion of the performance, when the performer is so in the zone that they're not even really paying attention to the crowd, that they're just in their own little world, in their own little happy place, and they're in the zone, And that's kind of the only way I can really describe it, when they're just totally into what they're doing, and nobody else in the world matters, just what they're doing on the guitar or in the song is captured in the moment,
Is now, from a photographer, do you take a lot of pictures during a shoot and then have to go through a lot of them and say,
yeah.
Is that how that works? I mean, like, it's constantly and then There's hundreds of pictures that you're sifting through at the end of a shoot.
A lot of times during a guitar solo or somebody's jumping off the drum riser or they're doing something like that, I'll have my camera on 5 frames a second. Most of the time I do have it on 5 frames a second. So I do bursts of photos.
Oh.
And sometimes that 7th photo or that 10th photo, the first 6 can, be shitty.
Yeah.
But that 7th one is the iconic one. Like I've got a photo of Stevie Nicks with her leg, kicking her leg up. And
I saw that.
It's perfectly vertical.
Yeah.
And that was a burst of like 10 photos. And the other ones were worthless. But that one photo in the middle of the set was the perfect one. And that's the only one I care about. The other ones I'd throw away. And with memory cards, I can take as many photos as I want. There's some film photographers who still shoot film.
Yeah.
And the thought of doing a concert with 5 rolls of film and having to time out 96 photos over a show,
yeah,
that's horrifying to me because
yeah.
I'll do 96 photos in the first, minute or so of the first song.
Yeah.
Not much less trying to space that out for the whole show. I can't even imagine that.
So when it comes to this job, if you want to call it a job or hobby, or it's a job, I mean, you're getting paid to do it. So a lot of your time is in that part.
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine, right? It's not so much the shoot itself. The shoot's quick. You get in there, you take your pictures, you get out. Now you got to go through everything, and you got to freaking and then there's editing to the pictures also.
A lot of editing. It's even the perfect picture I edit. It's really no different than a guitarist in the studio can lay down the perfect guitar track, but you can always make it a little better with an EQ or some verb or delay or whatever effects. So that's I do a lot of editing on photos sometimes, and like for the pop artists with 3-minute songs. A lot of times I'll look at the timestamp on the first and the last photo just to see how long I was shooting. And sometimes it's 7 or 8 minutes. And then I'll go home and it'll take me 3 hours to go through all the photos and do my editing and cropping and get a set of 30 or however many that I give to the magazine. And most of the time they have to have them by the open of business the next day. So I have to go right home from the show and get them done before I go to sleep. And the 3-song thing used to bother me. But over the years, I've gotten used to it, or actually like it now, because especially places like Blossom, I can get the hell out of there after the 3rd song and
stuck in traffic.
Not spend 3 hours in traffic.
Yeah,
and if I stay for the whole show, which I do sometimes if I really like the band, but if I stay for the whole show, I'm up till 4 a.m.
Yeah, right.
So I get out of there after 3 songs. I get home. I'm usually done by midnight or so, and it's it's a kind of an early evening.
I usually do things in chronological order, but I want to go back to something that you touched on because I think it'd be interesting. You said you were Michael Stanley's basically personal photographer for 20 years.
Concert photographer. Yeah.
Concert photographer for 20 years. Did you become good friends with them through this process, or?
I was friends. I didn't hang out with them a lot, but I was friends with them. I did a photo shoot at his house where we hung out, and I would hang out with him before shows and stuff. And he was I think of the thousands of people I worked with. I don't know if I ever worked with anybody that had more integrity than he did.
Really?
He was just a super nice guy.
No shit.
I mean, if you interrupted him at dinner with his family and wanted them to sign a napkin and you were in his face, he might be a little standoffish, but he was the nicest guy. He was a super, super, super guy.
Yeah, and pretty popular around these parts.
Oh my God, enormously popular. I mean, he held the attendance records at almost every venue, Blossom, the Front Row, the Coliseum, all those places he had the attendance records for.
Now, aside from doing just music, concerts, and stuff like that, you do other things. You don't just take pictures of great band members and stuff. You take other pictures. You do other stuff.
Yeah,
too.
about 5 or so years into it, I started getting asked to do portrait stuff, like high school graduation photos and weddings and stuff. And I started doing those because they pay well, especially weddings. But a wedding is like a 40-hour work week. A wedding is a huge undertaking.
Just one wedding.
Yeah. I mean, you're there for 10 hours during the day and then, processing all those photos. There's thousands of photos.
Yeah.
So that's a big job. And I really don't do a lot of weddings anymore because it's just
a big undertaking.
Well, and then you're just dealing with a lot of unsavory people and drunks by the end of the night and bridezillas and momzillas and
we talked about this with another episode. I was like, isn't it tough with this? Oh, it was Tricky Dick, I think it was. Yeah, and I was like, is it tough when you're dealing with some of these soon-to-be brides and all that stuff? I want my wedding perfect and da-da-da-da.
I got thrown out of a wedding once because right after the reception started, everybody was already drunk, and the groom and his brand-new father-in-law, the wife's father, got into a fist fight on the dance floor. And this was like right after dinner. And so I walked up and started taking pictures. I mean, it was my job. And
hell yeah.
they threw me out. And that was the one they never came to. I got really good photos during the wedding, but I never heard from them. I tried to, left messages for them to give them their photos, but I never heard back from them. And after a couple experiences like that, I would only do weddings for friends and friends of friends. Or if I shot a wedding 3 years ago and one of the bridesmaids was getting married and she asked me, since I kind of knew her, I would do some. But I didn't do a lot of stranger weddings after the first 4 or 5 years because it was just bizarro world. The mom and the brides and the bridesmaids are popping Xanax and shit at 3 in the afternoon, and you just know it's going to end badly, and there was just. It was just not fun, and I got into photography doing concerts, and that is so much fun.
Yeah.
And weddings were just not fun at all. So I really kind of stopped doing it because I don't want to do stuff that's not fun.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this. Now, as far as the photography goes and concerts go and stuff, what's...
The portrait stuff I love. That's fun.
Well, I'm just wondering, what have you noticed so far as before the pandemic and after the pandemic? What has changed as far as that goes? Have you noticed anything different?
Not really. I mean, when the pandemic started, I lost a ton of gigs. And about a year after, like 2022, I really didn't shoot much of anything. After doing so many gigs and 150 a year for so long, I didn't realize how much I loved the downtime. And I started to really enjoy it. And I started doing some stuff like cooking and some stuff that I never thought I would enjoy, but I really started enjoying it. And I kind of got back into it about a year ago, and then not very much, but then I've kind of been building up a little bit. I'm still not close to the level I used to be, but I'm starting to do more shows. And I think the only thing that's really different is there's a higher percentage of shows that are from the soundboard, and some of the agreements are more restrictive. Where if I have to sign over copyrights to a band, I usually won't shoot the show. Oh. Because I've retained the copyrights to all of my photos.
So you want control over that part of it.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And if I can't at least use the photos on my own website to promote myself, a lot of times I won't do the show.
You won't take on the job.
What's the point if I can't even use a photo myself? It's okay. I might say I'm not going to sell it or anything, but if I can't even use it on social media or anything like that, fuck it. Why would I want, that's ridiculous.
Have you had any issues with other bands, or have you had any problems where you just, not that we have to say names or anything, but like, have you ever worked for somebody or done a shoot and wound up finding out that this guy was a real asshole or this girl was a real asshole, this artist or whatever? And you're just...
Usually not the artist, but I've dealt with some tour managers and some people that were real assholes. But it's out of 1,500 shows, that's maybe happened 3 or 4 times.
Oh, really? So it's real rare. Usually everyone's pretty cordial.
And those have always been with some of the classic rock bands. The pop bands, Britney Spears, those people are traditionally much nicer and easier to work with than the crusty old 70-year-old Billy Joel tour manager who's been jaded after being in the business for 20 years and really kind of doesn't want to be there. And that's not true for everybody, but I have much better experiences with the pop people. And I've got hired for a lot of cool things like, to shoot meet and greets for people like Kendrick Lamar and stuff, where they invite you on the bus after the show and they'll, party with you and pass a blunt around, and they're really nice people and stuff. And that doesn't happen a lot with a lot of the crusty classic rock people.
Really? They keep the blunts to themselves.
Yeah, selfish people,
So what do you think, like, as far as the future goes with all this? Is just going to keep going with the photography for now? Is that it? What about broadcasting? You ever get an itch?
I do radio shows for the indie network that I work with of independent bands, but I don't know if maybe if the trend turns around from the iHearts and the, conglomeration stations and
terrestrial radio is taking a backseat lately to a lot of
I would do something. I might be doing a couple of shows on the Summit down in Akron. I was talking to them recently about doing some stuff.
Pretty popular.
It's a great station, and my program director from Rock 107 in Canton, where I used to work, is involved there. A guy named Garrett Hartz, one of my favorite program directors of all the stations I ever worked at. But as far as doing something on an iHeart station or anything like that, I would never want to do that.
Okay.
If I had some independent control on some smaller stations or a public station or something like that, I would probably be interested. And I even kind of see the photography thing kind of going the way that radio went. It's being devalued. Everybody takes cell phone pictures now, so no one gives a shit about paying someone like me because they got 500 people that are right by the stage taking their cell phone pictures and giving them to the band.
That's true. And these cell phones have incredible cameras on them now too.
Well, those photos aren't really the greatest.
No, but I mean, like in something that comes in a package this big, I mean, it's so convenient. I mean, compared to what they used to take is what I'm talking about. They've really come a long way with these freaking cell phones.
But a lot of times, though, when the lights are flashing fast and the performers are moving fast, cell phones are different. I mean, if you're standing in a field or you're sitting here doing a selfie, those photos are fantastic. Yeah. But to take a fast-moving sports photo or a fast-moving concert photo where there's lots of different lighting changes and stuff, that's difficult. And that's the reason I love concert photography, because it's so difficult. I could sit in the field and get a perfect picture every time, because you can make minute adjustments all day long until it's perfect. When I'm doing even if I've shot at House of Blues or Blossom 100 times, every light show's different. Yeah. And those lights are fast moving. The stage could be completely lit up, and then there's just a spotlight on a performer 5 seconds later. So you can never just set a setting and sit there and work. You always have to adjust every 5 seconds. And it's really, I think concert photography and fast-moving sports photography are probably the two hardest types of photography. And that's why I like it, because it never gets easy. It's always a challenge. It's always hard. And I like that, because I can never phone it in, you know?
Yeah. We're out of time, man. I got to tell you, we're done.
Wow, that went quick.
That was fast. But it was awesome. I think that was cool, man. I mean, like, you do a lot. You've done a lot. Very interesting life.
I appreciate having me on. Congratulations on your recent award.
Thank you, man.
Very cool. Let me check that out. Hold it up for everybody. Best radio host, is that the award?
Yeah, it was for best radio host.
From my
appreciate it. No, it's cool. All right, that's it from us. I want to thank Joe for coming down here, and
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hell yeah, dude. It was going to be great. It's going to be a good episode. We'll see you guys next week. Take it easy.
Peace.
That'll be fine.